Louis XIV had a peculiarity. Actually, Louis XIV had several peculiarities. The man slept in a bed so enormous it required 3 footmen just to make it, wore heels so high he needed handrails on the staircases, and once spent 4 hours watching himself get dressed because 47 courtiers had been assigned the honour of standing there watching him do it. None of them were allowed to look bored, which must have made for some extraordinary acting. But among Louis's many peculiarities, one stands above the rest for sheer audacious paradox. He built the most surveilled building in the history of Europe, designed it from the foundations up to make privacy literally impossible, and in doing so, accidentally created one of the most spectacular hidden social worlds the French aristocracy had ever seen. Let me explain. The Palace of Versailles was not just a home. It wasn't even just a very large home, though it was certainly that. It was a machine. A vast, gilded, marble-floored, mirror-lined machine designed to keep France's most powerful nobles under constant, unrelenting, not a moment to yourself observation. 10,000 people lived there. Louis XIV could watch everything, and frequently did. He knew who was friends with who was plotting against who had arrived at the morning lever 3 minutes late, and was going to hear about it through the subtle but devastating medium of being excluded from the next hunting party. The entire point of Versailles was that you could not, under any circumstances, have a private life. This was fine in theory. In practice, someone forgot to tell a rather significant portion of the court, who had an extraordinarily busy private life, and were operating it quite successfully right under the Sun King's nose, in a network of hidden apartments, forgotten staircases, midnight salons, and correspondence so cleverly coded that historians are still decoding it 350 years later. Some of them are doing it with the expression of a person who has just found the diary entry they were always hoping to find. Welcome to the other Versailles, the one the official tour doesn't cover. This is the story that the Palace of Versailles doesn't put on its official map. It's there in Saint-Simon's diaries, the most gloriously indiscreet historical document ever committed to paper, in surviving court correspondence held in the French National Archives, and in the records of the men who were quietly, efficiently, and very inconveniently exiled for failing to keep their private lives quite private enough. This extraordinary document shows us something remarkable about the supposedly rigid world of the 17th century French court. As we settle in tonight, we're going to discover not just what the historical record reveals, but what it tells us about the surprisingly relatable lives of men who lived in one of the most gilded cages ever constructed. But before we begin this journey together, let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching tonight. And please also take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Now dim the lights and prepare to discover why this story will change how you think about the most famous palace in the world. Tonight, you are standing at the far end of the Hall of Mirrors, Versailles. Sometime around midnight in 1685, the candles, 1,700 of them, because apparently Louis XIV counted, have been snuffed out. The court has officially retired. His Majesty is in his enormous bed, surrounded by the men assigned to watch him sleep, which was an actual job. The official life of the palace has, for this one short window of darkness, suspended itself. But listen, somewhere down the corridor, past the grand staterooms with their painted ceilings and their furniture that was never designed to be comfortable, through a door that doesn't appear on any ceremonial floor plan, up a staircase so narrow that 2 men can barely pass each other sideways, there are voices, low laughter, the clink of wine glasses, the particular sound of men who have, for the first time since the morning lever, stopped performing. Now here's where we need to understand something fundamental about Versailles before we can understand what was hidden inside it. Because the hiding, as it turns out, was only possible because of the showing. The Shadow Palace was a direct and almost inevitable product of the sunlit one. Louis XIV moved his entire government to Versailles in 1682, lock, stock and 1,700 candles. Before this, the French court had been a peripatetic thing, shuffling between Paris and various royal residences, and France's great noble families had largely been left to stew in their ancestral chateau, in the provinces and crucially to plot. They had plotted quite a lot, as it happened. There had been a civil war, the Fronde barely 30 years earlier, in which the nobles had made a rather spectacular attempt to claw back their medieval powers from the crown. Louis XIV had been 7 years old when it began, and had spent part of his childhood being woken in the middle of the night and bundled through Paris in a carriage because the city was rioting. He had absolutely zero intention of repeating that experience. His solution was, you have to admit, elegantly vicious. Rather than suppress the nobility by force, he invited them. He made Versailles so magnificent, so central, so completely the place where everything important happened, that any noble who stayed away was effectively announcing their own irrelevance to the entire country. Want a military commission for your eldest son? You needed to be at Versailles. Want a pension? A lucrative government appointment? Permission to marry above your station? Any hope of advancement whatsoever? All of it required your physical presence at court. The palace wasn't just opulent, it was a trap so beautiful that people competed for the privilege of walking into it, and then found they couldn't leave. The architecture of total surveillance was built into this trap from the foundations up. Every moment of Louis XIV's day was a public ceremony. The lever, the morning rising, was attended by between 100 and 150 courtiers, depending on how important you were and whether you'd been granted the right to be present at all. Getting dressed was a precisely choreographed performance with assigned roles. The first gentleman of the bedchamber handed the king his shirt, the grand chamberlain provided the candle, and approximately 40 other men stood around watching a human being put their trousers on, trying to look as though this was a perfectly normal way to begin a Thursday. The going to bed, the coucher, was the same thing in reverse, with the same audience in reverse order. The genius, and honestly the psychological horror of this system, was that watching the king watch you watching the king became the entire social currency of Versailles. If you were admitted to the royal bedchamber for the lever, that was status. If you were admitted to the inner cabinet, remarkable status. If the king paused, looked directly at you over his morning bouillon, and asked in his most kingly way how your health was, men who witnessed that exchange would be reporting it back to their provincial families for months. Saint-Simon, whom we will be spending a great deal of time with tonight, because his diaries are genuinely the gift that keeps on giving, records entire passages about the precise angle of a royal glance and what it portended for the career of the man it fell upon. He once wrote several paragraphs about who was positioned to the left and who to the right at a reception, and why this distinction would define careers for the next decade. He meant it completely seriously. He was completely right. This is the world that 10,000 people woke up to every morning, a world where every gesture was coded, every relationship was observed, and privacy was not merely absent but structurally abolished. The public rooms of Versailles, the Hall of Mirrors, the grand apartments, the Chapel Royal were not just magnificent spaces. They were stages. Everyone on them was performing, always, without intermission, without understudies, and with absolutely nowhere to put your personal life. Now, speaking of which, and this is the detail that the official Versailles guides tend to hurry past, have you ever actually looked at a proper architectural floor plan of Versailles? Not the simplified tourist version, but the real plans from the late 17th century. Because the palace, for all its insistence on total visibility, contains a remarkable number of staircases that don't go anywhere ceremonial, corridors that aren't featured in the official tour, rooms above rooms, tucked into the roofline, accessible only by narrow stone steps that were never designed to appear in any portrait or diplomatic account. These were, officially, the servants' spaces, the utilitarian infrastructure of a palace that required thousands of people to keep it running. But here is the thing about buildings designed for one purpose. The people inside them always find other ones. Let us talk about the petits appartements. Every significant figure at Versailles had two addresses, in a manner of speaking. There was the official apartment, the grand, formal staterooms facing the gardens, where official visits were received, where the furniture was impractical but magnificent, and where the wall hangings cost more than a working family would see in several lifetimes. These were the rooms that featured in portraits. These were the rooms where you performed your existence as a member of the French court. And then there were the petits appartements, the private rooms, often tucked above or directly behind the grand apartments, accessible via internal staircases that were not on the ceremonial route. These were the spaces where the inhabitants of Versailles actually lived. They were smaller, lower-ceilinged, warmer in winter, less likely to have a ceiling painted with allegorical figures celebrating the glory of the French monarchy. They were also, in many cases, far more interesting. Louis XIV himself had his own petits appartements, where he retreated from the relentless ceremony of the staterooms to eat relatively normal meals, keep his private art collection, and occasionally experience the revolutionary sensation of being in a room where fewer than 70 people were watching him breathe. Saint-Simon describes the king's private rooms as decorated with curiosities and personal objects that would have seemed wildly out of place downstairs, the private tastes of a man who, in public, existed only as a symbol. If the king himself maintained a shadow life behind the gilded facade, you can imagine what everyone else was getting up to. The geography of invisibility at Versailles worked in layers, and the most useful way to picture it is as a very tall, very gilded cake. At the bottom layer, the ceremonial floors, marble, chandeliers, social performance conducted at full volume. Above that, the petits appartements of the senior courtiers. And then above that, tucked under the roofline in rooms technically designated for servants and minor officers of the household, an entire warren of small, low, dark, private spaces that were, by the 1680s, the most coveted real estate in France. These upper rooms, sometimes called the attic apartments, sometimes simply referred to as above stairs in surviving documents, were not luxurious. They were small, cold in winter, stifling in August when the heat rose through all the floors below them and concentrated in the roof like a very expensive oven. They lacked windows of any grandeur. They were, by every measurable standard, objectively worse than the magnificent apartments below them in every particular. They also had something the magnificent apartments completely lacked. Nobody could tell who was in them at any given moment. To move between these rooms, you used the escaliers dérobés, the hidden staircases. These ran through the walls of the palace like the building's own circulatory system, entirely separate from the grand ceremonial staircases that featured in paintings and ambassadorial accounts. They connected floors, wings, and apartments in ways that the official geography of the building didn't advertise or acknowledge. A courtier who knew Versailles well, and many of them had lived there for years, knew it the way you know your own childhood neighbourhood, with all the shortcuts and back ways that never appear on any map, could move from one end of the palace to another without ever setting foot on a main corridor. To be absolutely clear, these staircases weren't secret in the sense that nobody knew they existed. Everyone knew. The servants used them constantly. The ladies-in-waiting used them. They appeared in architectural records. What made them functionally private was not their invisibility, but their ambiguity. And in a palace where being observed somewhere was the primary social event of any given day, not being observed somewhere was an extraordinarily valuable thing. You couldn't prove where someone was coming from. You couldn't prove how long they'd been there. And in a world where being seen at such and such place could define or destroy a career, the ability to have been nowhere in particular was worth a very great deal indeed. There is a rather wonderful entry in Saint-Simon's diaries in which he describes trying to locate a specific courtier at a specific hour, and finding, to his evident frustration, that the man had simply vanished. Not left the palace, leaving without permission was career suicide and everyone knew it, but become temporarily, infuriatingly unfindable within it. Saint-Simon, who was constitutionally incapable of letting anything go, and had the energy of a man who had drunk rather too much coffee, eventually established that the man had been in the upper floors. He does not specify what the man was doing there. He doesn't need to. The implication hangs in the text like expensive perfume in a corridor long after the wearer has gone. The upper rooms of Versailles were also routinely shared. This was, officially, an economic necessity. Space was genuinely limited, even in a palace of 2,000 rooms, and junior courtiers and minor officers of the household were expected to double up without complaint. 2 men sharing a chamber above stairs was entirely normal, expected, unremarkable. And here, the real genius of the arrangement reveals itself. When an arrangement is expected and unremarkable, it attracts no attention whatsoever. When it attracts no attention, it is, for all practical purposes, invisible. Speaking of which, the role of the valets de chambre in all of this deserves particular attention, and we will return to it. These were the men whose entire professional life consisted of being physically intimate with their employers in ways that the 17th century considered entirely unexceptional, dressing them, undressing them, accompanying them everywhere, sleeping in or adjacent to their bedchambers. The first valet de chambre slept at the foot of the royal bed, in the same room every night, and was the first face Louis XIV saw in the morning and the last person to leave at night. This level of daily physical intimacy was a position of enormous court power, and it created, almost inevitably, a whole ecosystem of male intimacy at the very heart of Versailles that nobody questioned, because officially there was nothing to question. That, in a palace that abolished privacy, was rather the whole point. Here is where it gets properly fascinating, because the men of Louis XIV's court weren't only creating a shadow world within the physical spaces of the palace. They were also developing, with what I can only describe as impressive literary ingenuity and frankly admirable creativity, a parallel shadow language. The difficulty with written communication in the 17th century was that it was not, in any meaningful sense, private. Letters were opened, servants could be, and frequently were, bribed. Correspondence to and from Versailles passed through many hands before reaching its destination, and Louis XIV maintained an entire office, the Cabinet Noir, literally the Black Cabinet, whose sole professional function was to open letters of interest, read them, and reseal them sufficiently convincingly that the recipient wouldn't notice. This was not a secret. Absolutely everyone at court knew the Cabinet Noir existed. Everyone knew their letters were read. This was simply a condition of life at Versailles, accepted with the same resignation as the damp in the upper corridors and the smell of the kitchens in summer. What this meant for men who needed to communicate about things that were diplomatically unwise to put in plain language was that they needed to be creative. Happily, these were educated men with a thorough grounding in classical literature, considerable practice at saying one thing while meaning another, and, in some cases, a very fine sense of humour about the whole situation. The first technique was the deployment of feminine pronouns. A number of surviving pieces of court correspondence feature men writing to other men using elle, the French feminine she, when the context makes it entirely clear they are referring to another man. Not always consistently, and not always convincingly, historians reading these letters centuries later can generally identify the moment the pronoun stops matching the surrounding grammar, but frequently enough across multiple correspondences to establish an obvious pattern. The Chevalier de Lorraine, Philippe d'Orléans's most prominent companion, and a man whose role in the shadow world of Versailles we'll discuss shortly, features in letters from Philippe's circle in which he is occasionally referenced using feminine-coded language that stops just short of naming him directly. Whether anyone at the Cabinet Noir was fooled by this thin disguise is, one suspects, doubtful. But we intercepted a letter and it said she was considerably better deniability than we intercepted a letter and it said him. And in the world of Versailles, deniability was the whole game. The second technique was the elaborate and very creative deployment of friendship vocabulary. The 17th century had a rich intellectual tradition of idealized male friendship. The classical concept of amicitia, inherited from Roman and Greek sources, held that a perfect friendship between two men was a noble and ennobling thing, the highest form of human connection. This wasn't fringe opinion, it was mainstream educated philosophy. Men routinely wrote to their male friends in terms that would, read today without context, be entirely unambiguous. Longing for the other man's company described as physical pain, the other man referred to as their better half. Joy at reunion expressed in language that would make a modern romance novelist nod approvingly. Now, and here is where historians have the most interesting arguments, not all of this was coded. Some of it really was simply the literary idiom of the time. Educated 17th century men genuinely did write to their friends this way, and a number of them demonstrably meant nothing beyond what the word said. The difficulty, which is also the fascination, is that the same vocabulary available to an entirely platonic friendship was equally available to relationships that were something considerably more than platonic. The language created a perfect, deliberate fog. What scholars have been able to do, particularly in the last 30 years, as attitudes to the history of same-sex relationships have shifted, and researchers have gone back to these documents with fresh eyes and without the previous generation's determination to find innocent explanations for everything, is identify patterns. Not single letters in isolation, but whole correspondences, the cumulative texture of dozens of letters exchanged between the same two men over years, the vocabulary of longing that escalates specifically after a forced separation, the references to shared times and places that only make sense if the two men were together in circumstances the official record doesn't account for, the abrupt gap in a correspondence where something has clearly happened, followed by a change of tone, the particular quality of a letter written by a man who has something he cannot write about and is writing around it instead. Saint-Simon is, yet again, our indispensable guide here. He could not and would not name what he was describing in plain language. He was a man of his time, and even his spectacularly uninhibited diary had limits, but he used a vocabulary of recurring phrases that contemporary scholars have effectively decoded as a kind of critical lexicon. When Saint-Simon describes a man as having des goûts particuliers, particular tastes, he means something specific and consistent. When he writes that someone was known for des amitiés de la même nature, friendships of the same nature, he is not, I'm afraid, talking about a shared interest in falconry. He uses these phrases across dozens of diary entries, always in contexts where the surrounding details leave the meaning impossible to mistake. What's rather endearing about Saint-Simon, viewed from a historical distance, is that he was magnificently inconsistent in his moral response to what he was observing. Sometimes he records it with the theatrical horror you might expect from a duke of the French Ancien Régime. He is appalled, he is scandalized, he is practically reaching for his smelling salts with both hands. Other times he records it with the calm, matter-of-fact tone of a man noting that the weather has turned. This courtier had this relationship, it was known at court. These were the administrative consequences. Moving on. He was too good a historian, too genuinely curious about everything he observed, to let his own opinions consistently get in the way of documentation. Posterity should be very grateful for this character flaw. The letters in the French National Archives add enormously to the picture. Private correspondence from aristocratic family collections, some of it not seriously examined by scholars until late in the 20th century, contains exchanges between men that begin in entirely conventional friendship vocabulary and, over the course of years, almost imperceptibly shift into something else. The shift is never explicit, never, ever explicit, but it is unmistakable in aggregate. The particular way a man writes about wanting to hear another man's laugh again, the quality of absence he describes, the endings of certain letters, where the prose stops more abruptly than the grammar requires, as though the writer began a sentence, read it back, and thought considerably better of it. It is, I find, quite moving, the sheer creative effort that went into finding language for something the official language of their world didn't acknowledge having words for. Right, so we've established the stage, the architecture, the spaces, the language. Now, let's talk about what happened when the curtain came down unexpectedly. Because the shadow world of Versailles was not, as it turned out, impervious. It was sustainable only as long as it remained genuinely invisible. And invisibility was not something that could always be guaranteed. Men made mistakes. Servants talked. Rivals found it extremely useful to produce evidence at strategically well-chosen moments. And Louis XIV, for all that historians have debated his personal views on the activities in question, had very clear and consistent policies about what could be tolerated when it remained discreet, and what required a visible response when it didn't. The most dramatic case, and, in a particularly French way, the most quietly devastating, was that of Louis de Bourbon, Comte de Vermandois. He was Louis XIV's legitimized son by his royal mistress Louise de la Vallière, which is to say, he was about as well born as it was possible to be without being the actual heir to the throne. He grew up at Versailles, arrived as a child and knew no other world, and matured into exactly the kind of young man the palace specialized in producing. Beautiful, well-educated, thoroughly charming, completely unprepared for any life outside the court's golden walls, and by his early adolescence deeply embedded in the social networks that the official guidebooks did not discuss. By his teenage years, the Comte de Vermandois was at the centre of what Saint-Simon describes, with all his characteristic oblique precision, as a group of young noblemen at court who were, to put it mildly, very close indeed. Saint-Simon refers to them, in one of his more theatrical moments, as an infâme confrérie, an infamous brotherhood. He provides names, which in the context of Saint-Simon's diary amounts to a historical document of remarkable specificity. The Prince de la Roche-sur-Yon, the Comte de Marsan, the Duc de Vendôme, and several others. These were not minor figures. These were the sons and heirs of the families that ran France. The fact that Saint-Simon listed them at all, even in a private diary, indicates how openly known this circle was within the court. The Comte de Vermandois was the youngest of them, and in some ways the most exposed. He was 17. He had, as mentioned, grown up at Versailles and had no reference point outside it. The relationships he formed there were simply the relationships of his life. He had not chosen a dangerous world. He had been born into the only world he knew, and discovered at 17 that some parts of it were considerably more dangerous than others. What happened next was managed by Louis XIV, with the particular combination of clinical efficiency and absolute silence that characterized how he dealt with things that couldn't be permitted to exist officially. The Comte de Vermandois was not prosecuted. There was no public spectacle. That would have been embarrassing, and Louis XIV's own son being connected to anything embarrassing was categorically, non-negotiably unacceptable. Instead, the young man was simply removed from court. He was sent to the army. This was the standard mechanism for translating inconvenient young noblemen into somewhere more useful, and placed in a position that looked on its surface like an honour, but was functionally exile. He died the following year, 1683, at the siege of Courtiers, at 17 years old. Louis XIV did not attend the funeral. That fact sits in the historical record very quietly, and does not require any embellishment. Louis XIV did not attend the funeral of his 17-year-old son. The other young men of the circle were handled individually, and with varying degrees of leniency, calibrated precisely according to how useful their families were to the crown and how much noise their removal would make. Several were dispatched to their provincial estates for extended periods, long enough to be unambiguous, not so long as to constitute a permanent disgrace. Some returned to court within a year or two, apparently having absorbed the primary lesson of Versailles, which was not that this was wrong, but that it was something that absolutely had to be invisible. A few were not seen at Versailles again. The Duc de Vendôme, it should be noted, subsequently had a long and extremely distinguished military career, serving both Louis XIV and Louis XV. He is one of several men in this story who navigated the shadow world of Versailles successfully over many decades, managed his visibility with considerable skill, and died with his public reputation entirely, scrupulously intact. His private correspondence, examined by later historians, tells a rather different and considerably more interesting story. He managed the distance between those two narratives for his entire adult life. You have to respect the professionalism of it. The mechanism of quiet exile, efficient, final, with no public acknowledgement of its actual cause, was the primary tool the court used for managing this world. It was not, it's important to understand, a legal prosecution in most of these cases. The legal framework for prosecuting same-sex relations between men existed in 17th century France. It was technically a capital offence under the relevant ordinances, but it was applied almost exclusively to men without rank or family connections. A nobleman of significant standing was virtually never prosecuted in a court of law. Instead, he was managed. He was moved. He was given a posting that happened to be in a different country, or a commission that happened to require his presence very far from Paris, or he simply found that the social invitations had stopped arriving and the quality of the king's morning nod had become perceptibly cooler, and he was wise enough to understand the message without needing it written down. There is something arguably more chilling about this than an outright prosecution would have been. A prosecution creates a public record, and records can, eventually, be challenged or overturned. This was vaguer, quieter, and consequently more absolute. Your entire existence at court depended on royal favour, and royal favour could be withdrawn for reasons that were never stated and never needed to be. A man removed from Versailles in this way had no mechanism of appeal. He couldn't argue against an accusation that had never formally been made. He simply ceased to exist in the world that mattered. The shadow world adapted accordingly. It learned, through a very efficient process of social evolution, to be better at being invisible. The networks became more careful. The letters became more oblique. The use of the back staircases was managed with greater discretion and rather more attention to who else was nearby. The whole elaborate architecture of private life at Versailles became, through hard experience, considerably more adept at remaining private. Now here's the part of the story that most Versailles accounts either skip entirely or handle in embarrassed footnotes. Not everyone in the shadow world of Versailles operated under the same conditions of danger. There was a protected circle, and it revolved naturally around the most protected man at court who wasn't the king himself. Philippe, Duc d'Orléans, Louis XIV's younger brother, known to the court as Monsieur, a man who wore more jewellery than almost anyone else at Versailles, and who we have covered in considerable depth in a previous episode, occupied a social position so fundamentally untouchable that the mechanisms of quiet exile simply could not be applied to him. The king could not exile his own brother, could not demote him to a provincial posting without creating a diplomatic incident, could not, essentially, remove him from the palace he had lived in since childhood. Philippe was a permanent, indelible, unavoidable feature of Versailles, and consequently, his household was too. And Philippe's household was, by any measure, extraordinary. Over decades of court life, he gathered around himself a circle of men who shared his inclinations, his aesthetic sensibilities, and his cheerful disregard for the official position on all of the above. The Chevalier de Lorraine, Philippe's most prominent companion, the man who remained a central presence in his life for nearly 3 decades, and who was regarded by most of the court with a mixture of fascination and poorly concealed alarm, is the most famous of these. But he was far from alone. Philippe's maison contained numerous men whose relationships with each other, and with Philippe himself, were understood within the court to be something rather more complex than the job description suggested. What Philippe's circle provided for the broader shadow world of Versailles was something like a proof of concept, a demonstration that survival was possible. If the king's own brother could maintain this kind of life openly enough that it was simply known, not discussed, not officially acknowledged, but known to absolutely everyone, including the man who cleaned the mirrors, then there was a working template for how to exist. The template required either rank or very useful proximity to rank. It required a specific kind of discretion, not the discretion of complete concealment, but the more sophisticated discretion of never making anything official enough that the king was required to respond to it. This distinction is subtler than it sounds, but it was absolutely fundamental to how the shadow world of Versailles functioned. There is a profound difference in a world run on ceremony and official acknowledgement between a thing being known and a thing being stated. The entire social architecture of Versailles ran on exactly this distinction. Louis XIV knew, the court knew, Saint-Simon knew, Lord did Saint-Simon know, and he documented it with the gleeful thoroughness of a man who understood that he was writing for history. But none of it was ever stated, which meant none of it officially existed, which meant the king never officially had to respond to it. Everyone involved understood the rules of this arrangement, and everyone involved kept to them with remarkable discipline. The men in and around Philippe's circle who benefited from this protection were not exclusively the grand nobility. Some of the most interesting figures were men of lesser rank who had arrived at Versailles from the provinces and discovered in the orbit of the Orléans household a world they had not been prepared to find. Younger sons of minor noble families, men who might otherwise have been destined for the church or a middling military commission and a life of provincial obscurity, found positions adjacent to Philippe's household and were effectively absorbed. For them, proximity to Monsieur was the difference between a life conducted in constant danger and something rather more sustainable. And then there were the valets, to whom we promised to return, And now we return. The valets de chambre of the great noble households occupied a position of daily physical intimacy with their employers that the 17th century considered entirely unremarkable. They dressed them, bathed them, travelled everywhere with them, shared their private apartments. In several documented cases from the period, documented carefully in private correspondence that later historians examined with great interest, the relationship between a nobleman and his valet was something rather more than professional. These relationships were arguably the most protected of the entire shadow world, because they existed in precisely the space the official gaze was most carefully designed not to look at. The relationship between a nobleman and his male servant was not a thing the social machinery of Versailles had a category for, which meant it was invisible almost by definition. It didn't need to hide, it simply had to exist in a register that the official world didn't acknowledge having. Here is where I want to leave you tonight. In the Palace of Versailles, if you visit it now, you can walk the Hall of Mirrors and the grand apartments and stand in the Chapel Royal and look up at the ceilings and understand why a continent spent 2 centuries trying to imitate the place. It is genuinely extraordinary. It is also, as I hope tonight has made clear, only part of the story. The upper floors, the narrow warren-like attique rooms above the grand apartments, the servants' corridors, the spaces where the escaliers dérobés open onto, are still there. Not all of them are open to the public. The physical geography of the Shadow Palace has survived largely intact, 3 centuries of revolution, republic, empire, restoration and tourism. The building that Louis XIV designed to make privacy impossible contains, if you know where to look, the architecture of the most elaborate private world in European history. The letters have survived too. Saint-Simon's diaries, 12 volumes, approximately 2 million words, the most spectacularly indiscreet sustained act of documentation in the history of French literature, are in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. The surviving correspondence of Philippe's circle is partially catalogued. The private letters between men that historians of same-sex history have been carefully, methodically excavating for the past 3 decades sit in archives in Paris, Versailles, and various aristocratic family collections, waiting for the researchers who know what they're looking for. What this means in practical terms is that the shadow world of Versailles is not truly lost. It was suppressed, deliberately, systematically, by a social order that required it not to exist officially. But suppression is not the same as destruction. The evidence is there, in the gaps and the oblique references in the letters that stop mid-sentence, and the diary of a duke who simply could not help himself. There is something genuinely moving about this, which I don't think it diminishes the history to say. These were men who navigated circumstances that required them to be invisible, to live in back staircases and coded pronouns and the carefully maintained ambiguity of goûts particuliers. Some of them were exiled, some of them died very young. The Comte de Vermandois was 17 years old, and his father did not come to his funeral. That is a fact the historical record carries quietly, without comment, and it doesn't need any. But they also built something. Within the most watched building in Europe, in the spaces between the ceremony and the observation and the relentless performance of official life, they built a world. It had its own geography, its own language, its own codes. It was maintained across decades by hundreds of men, most of whom history has simply listed as valets, officers, attendants, younger sons, the footnotes of a story officially about kings. That world was real. It existed. The walls of Versailles still contain it. And speaking of bedtime, we've turned this story into a PDF storybook that you can download for absolutely nothing. It's got the full tale, the eye-catching images, perfect for reading under the covers without the blue light keeping you awake. See the comments for details. Until our next archaeological adventure together, this is the Sleeping Archaeologist, encouraging you to remain curious about the incredible tales still waiting to be discovered beneath our feet. Sweet dreams, fellow explorers. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and may your rest be filled with wonder at the remarkable tapestry of human history. But for now, stay tuned as we have a bonus story coming right up.
Thank you for having me here. What a great channel. Our next story is the untold story of Pompeii's doomed first responders. Hope you like it. There's a certain picture of the Roman world we've all been sold, probably by a tired high school history teacher who is just trying to make it to Friday. It's a world of marble-cold stoics, people who faced down barbarian hordes and collapsing empires with a stiff upper lip and an expression that suggested they were pondering complex aqueduct legislation. When we think of Pompeii, that image gets even sharper. We picture Romans frozen in time by Vesuvius, passively accepting their fate, or maybe just caught completely off guard while trying to finish one last batch of olive oil. We see the disaster, and we see the victims. We don't tend to see the heroes. The story of the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD is often framed as a purely natural disaster, a horrifying but ultimately impersonal act of geology. The humans in the story are props, a collection of plaster-cast bodies that serve as a grim tableau. We imagine the great Roman naturalist, Pliny the Elder, as the ultimate example of this, a curious old academic who sailed a little too close to the volcano out of scientific curiosity, a kind of ancient volcanologist who fatally misjudged his safety perimeter. He saw a fascinating cloud, went to investigate, and paid the price for his nerdy obsession. It's a neat, tidy story of intellectual hubris. And it is completely, utterly wrong. Tonight, you are not a passive victim. You are not a foolhardy academic on a field trip. It is the 24th of August, 79 AD. You are Gaius Plinius Secundus, better known to history as Pliny the Elder. You are 56 years old, a celebrated author, a former governor, a trusted advisor to the emperor, and most importantly for today's agenda, you are the *Prefectus Classis *, the commanding admiral of the *Classis Missinensis *, the most powerful naval fleet in the entire Roman Empire, stationed right here at Missiniem on the Bay of Naples. You are about to leverage that immense power to launch the first recorded large-scale, state-sponsored disaster relief operation in Western history. You are not an observer. You are a first responder. Our proof, our receipts for this revised history, isn't a recently unearthed mosaic or a sword pulled from the mud. It's something far more personal and immediate. Our evidence is a pair of letters written by your adoring and occasionally exasperating teenage nephew, Pliny the Younger. These letters, written to the historian Tacitus years after the event, are the black box recorder of your final hours. They are a detailed, emotional, and unambiguous eyewitness account of your actions. They don't describe a man consumed by curiosity. They describe a commander consumed by duty. They describe a hero. The story they tell was so clear that it forced historians to look at the ash-covered bodies on the beach at Herculaneum, not just as victims, but as people who might have been waiting for a rescue that almost came. This discovery, made not in the dirt, but in the careful reading of ancient texts, reveals something extraordinary about the Roman concepts of duty, courage, and crisis response. As we settle in tonight, we're going to uncover not just what your nephew wrote, but what it tells us about the surprisingly relatable lives of people who lived in the shadow of a sleeping giant. Now dim the lights and prepare to discover why this story will change how you think about the end of Pompeii. Your day began, as most of your days do, with a profound sense of satisfaction mixed with a touch of lingering indigestion from last night's garum-soaked dormouse. Life is good. Here, in your sprawling villa overlooking the Bay of Naples, you have achieved the perfect Roman balance. Your life is a carefully curated blend of *OTIUM*, the leisurely pursuit of knowledge, and *negotium*, the demanding responsibilities of public office. From your study, you can see the glittering expanse of the bay, dotted with the pleasure barges of the ridiculously wealthy. To your left, you can see the might of Rome itself, the forest of masts belonging to the hundreds of warships under your command, bobbing gently in the secure harbor of Misenum. It's the military-industrial complex with a beachfront view. You are, by any measure, a success. Your magnum opus, a 37-volume encyclopedia called *Naturalis Historia, *Natural History, is the ancient world's attempt to write down everything about everything. It's the original Wikipedia, if Wikipedia had been written by one slightly obsessive man with a penchant for bizarre, unverified facts about magical herbs and mythical creatures from India. It's your pride and joy, the product of countless sleepless nights and a small army of scribes. But it doesn't pay the bills. Your day job, Admiral of the Fleet, does. It's a prestigious post, the pinnacle of an equestrian career. You command thousands of sailors and marines, responsible for the security of the entire Western Mediterranean. It's a job that involves an astronomical amount of paperwork, mediating disputes between sailors who've had too much cheap wine, and nodding politely while senators from Rome explain naval strategy to you. This morning, you followed your usual routine. A light breakfast, some bread, figs, a little wine taken, while you dictated letters to a secretary. You've already dealt with a dozen tedious matters. A request for new rigging from a trireme captain in Ostia, a complaint about grain shipments, and a very delicately worded message to the emperor's cousin, asking him to please stop using navy ships for his private parties. After that, a cold bath, a habit you swear by for keeping the mind sharp, followed by some light reading. You are working your way through a treatise on Greek military tactics. It's all very civilized, very orderly. Your nephew, young Gaius, is here with you. He's a good boy, clever, a bit too serious for his age, but you see a spark of greatness in him. He is your heir, the future of the Pliny family, and you are trying to mold him into a proper Roman. This mostly involves assigning him vast amounts of reading and then quizzing him on it later. He's currently supposed to be translating a passage from Thucydides, but you can see him from the corner of your eye, staring out the window, probably daydreaming about poetry or some girl from down the road. You let it slide. The boy needs a little air. The afternoon sun is warm on the flagstones of your terrace. You've had a light lunch and are now enjoying a bit of a siesta in the sun, a well-worn scroll resting on your chest. The air is still, thick with the scent of pine and salt. The sounds are familiar, comforting. The distant shouts of men training at the naval base, the gentle lapping of waves against the shore below, the buzzing of a particularly persistent bee. It is a perfectly, profoundly, almost criminally normal summer afternoon. Your sister Plinia, the boy's mother, points it out. From the large dining room, a couch with a view, she calls your attention to the sky. There is a cloud, but not just any cloud. You've seen thousands of clouds in your 56 years. You've cataloged them, studied them, written about their shapes and what they portend. You have never seen anything like this. It is rising from behind a mountain, though from this distance, you can't be sure which one. Its shape is unusual. Your nephew would later describe it better than anyone, saying it resembled an umbrella pine tree, a long, vertical trunk of smoke and ash that then spread out at a great height into a massive, branching canopy. The color is unsettling, a dirty, mottled mix of white, gray, and earthy brown, as if the very ground itself had been ripped up and thrown into the heavens. Your first reaction is not fear. It is boundless, all-consuming curiosity. This is a phenomenon, a marvel of nature. Your scholar's brain immediately kicks into high gear, overriding any other instinct. What is causing it? What is it made of? How high is it? This must be observed. It must be documented. The encyclopedia is never truly finished. There is always a new chapter to add. You call for your sandals. You tell a slave to prepare a Liburnian galley, a small, fast warship perfect for a quick reconnaissance mission. You are going to get a closer look. As you are preparing to leave, your nephew asks if he can come with you. You see the excitement in his eyes, a sane intellectual hunger that drives you. You're tempted to say yes, to make this a teaching moment. But you've also just assigned him a mountain of homework. With a stern but loving pat on the shoulder, you tell him, "I think you'd rather study." It's a classic bit of parental misdirection. Years later, he would write that he chose to stay and work, a decision that would save his life and preserve your legacy. For now, he just looks a little disappointed as he trudges back to his desk. You are on the verge of departure, striding towards the dock where your fast ship is being readied. A scientist in you is buzzing with anticipation. This is the ultimate field trip. But just as you are about to step off your property, a runner, breathless and covered in dust, sprints up the path. He's from the small, luxurious coastal town of Herculaneum, at the very foot of the mountain. He carries a small wax tablet. It is a note, hastily scribbled from your friend Rectina, the wife of a man named Bassus. Her villa is trapped at the base of the volcano. There is no escape by land. The note is a frantic, terrified plea for help. In that instant, everything changes. The academic curiosity evaporates, replaced by the cold, clear logic of the admiral. This is no longer a scientific phenomenon to be observed. It is a catastrophe. People are in danger. Your friends are in danger. The mission profile shifts in a heartbeat, from observation to evacuation. The small, fast ship you ordered is no longer sufficient. You need the whole damn fleet. You turn to your subordinates, your voice calm but steel-hard, leaving no room for argument. Launch the quadriremes, you command. We are not going to look. We are going to rescue. This is the moment your story pivots. The quiet scholar is gone. The commander has taken his place. The responsibility on your shoulders is immense, far heavier than any military command. You are sailing not against an enemy fleet, but against the raw, indifferent power of the earth itself. And you have absolutely no idea what you are sailing into. The Bay of Naples, your beautiful, tranquil home, is about to become a vision of hell, and you are steering your ships directly into its heart. The true test of your life is not in the books you wrote, but in the actions you are about to take. The naval base at Misenum explodes into a state of what can only be described as organized chaos. In order to launch the fleet's heavy warships, the quadriremes, massive vessels, powered by 4 banks of oarsmen, is not a trivial matter. Normally, it would be preceded by days of planning, provisioning, and bureaucratic wrangling, thick enough to stop a charging bull. You are demanding it be done in minutes. But you are the admiral, and your word is law. Horns blare across the harbor. Centurions bellow orders, their voices raw. Men who were moments ago mending sails, gambling with dice, or sleeping off a cheap lunch are now scrambling to their stations. You are in the thick of it, not observing from your villa, but on the docks, directing the operation. You feel the familiar surge of adrenaline that comes with command. This is asterisk negotium asterisk. This is your duty. The air is filled with the sound of thousands of sandals pounding on wooden gangplanks, the rhythmic crack of whips on the backs of slow-moving slaves loading supplies, and the deep, groaning protest of massive timbers as the ships are pushed from their moorings. The smell is a pungent cocktail of sweat, salt, pitch, and a new, acrid scent carried on the breeze from across the bay, a faint, metallic tang of sulfur. Your plan is audacious, born of necessity. You will take the fleet of heavy warships directly across the bay, as close to the shoreline as you can get. You intend to evacuate not just your friend Rectina from Herculaneum, but anyone and everyone you can from the coastal towns now trapped between the erupting mountain and the sea. Pompeii, Oplantis, Stabiae. It's a massive, unprecedented undertaking. There is no Roman protocol for volcanic eruption evacuation. You are writing the manual as you go. You board your flagship, a sturdy quadrireme with a crew of hundreds. As you are pushed off from the dock, you look back one last time. You see your home, your villa perched on the cliffside, looking serene and untouched. You see your nephew and your sister, small figures watching from the terrace. You give a curt final wave. There is no time for sentiment. The journey begins peacefully enough. The rowers fall into their hypnotic rhythm, the asterisk hortator asterisk, or time beater, pounding his mallet to keep the stroke. The water of the bay is still relatively calm. But as you move out of the shelter of the Misenum Peninsula and into the open water, the reality of the situation begins to assert itself. The great cloud, which from a distance had a kind of terrible beauty, now looms over you like a vengeful god. It has blotted out the sun. The afternoon is turning into a strange gray twilight. Then the ash begins to fall. At first, it's just a light dusting, like a sprinkle of dirty snow. It clings to your clothes, gets in your eyes, leaves a gritty film on your tongue. But it grows thicker, heavier. Soon, a steady rain of fine gray powder is falling, coating the deck of your ship in a slick, treacherous layer. The air becomes harder to breathe, thick with dust. Men begin to cough, pulling their tunics over their mouths. Then comes the pumice. Small, light, porous stones, no bigger than pebbles, begin to patter against the deck. It's annoying, but not dangerous. But as you get closer to the opposite shore, the pebbles become rocks. They rain down with increasing ferocity, clattering against the wood, striking the helmets of the Marines stationed on deck. A man near you cries out as a sharp piece catches him on the shoulder. The asterisk hortator's asterisk steady beat is now competing with a deafening, continuous hailstorm of volcanic rock. The deck is becoming a minefield of hot, sharp stones. The sailors are getting scared. You can see it in their wide, ash-caked eyes. Your helmsman, a seasoned veteran with a face like a worn leather map, shouts to you over the din. He points towards the rudder, which is becoming difficult to control as the water around the ship churns, thick with floating pumice and ash, like a churning slurry of wet cement. "We should turn back, Admiral," he yells, his voice tight with panic. "The danger is too great. Fortune favors the brave, sir, but she abandons the reckless." It is the moment of truth. Every instinct of self-preservation is screaming at you to heed his advice. The mission seems impossible. The shore is invisible, hidden behind a curtain of falling debris. The sea itself is turning against you. Turning back would be the logical, sensible thing to do. No one would blame you, but you think of Rectina's note. You think of the thousands of people huddled in their homes or running in terror through the streets of those towns. You are their only hope. Your sense of duty, the core principle of your entire life, is an anchor in this storm of chaos. You look your helmsman in the eye, your own face a grim mask of determination. You shout back a line that your nephew will later make immortal. Fortune favors the brave. Steer for Pomponianus. You've made a tactical adjustment. The shoreline near Herculaneum and Pompeii is being so heavily bombarded that a landing is impossible. The sea is boiling. The air is a toxic fog. So you change course, heading slightly south towards Stabiae. It's a town further from the volcano's peak on the southern arm of the bay. You hope the conditions there will be better. Your friend Pomponianus lives there. If you can reach him, you can establish a beachhead, a safe zone, and wait for a change in the wind to begin the larger evacuation. It's a desperate gamble, but it's the only one you have. The journey to Stabiae is a voyage through a nightmare landscape. The world has lost its color, reduced to shades of gray and black. The sun is a memory. The air is so thick with ash, it feels like you are breathing wool. The pumice stones falling on the ship are now mixed with larger, heavier black rocks chunks of the volcano's old plumbing, hurled miles into the air. The constant impacts sound like a furious giant hammering on the hull. You order the Marines to raise their shields over their heads, creating a makeshift roof to protect the rowers below deck, who are still pulling with all their might, blind to the horrors above. You are the calm at the center of the storm. While others are verging on panic, you are observing, taking mental notes. You are a scientist to your very core, even now. You dictate observations to a scribe, who huddles beside you, trying to protect his wax tablet from the downpour. You note the type of rocks, the direction of the wind, the temperature of the ash. It is a coping mechanism, perhaps a way to impose intellectual order on a world that has descended into primeval chaos. Or maybe it's just who you are, a man incapable of not being curious. Finally, through the gray haze, you see the shoreline of Stabiae. You have made it across the bay. But your relief is short-lived. The scene on the shore is one of pure, unadulterated panic. People are running aimlessly along the beach, their faces streaked with ash and tears. They have packed their most precious belongings into sacks and bundles, now abandoned in the sand as they stare at the angry sea. The wind, blowing directly on shore, has whipped the waves into a furious, impassable chop. No ship can leave. They are trapped. You find your friend Pomponianus in the crowd. He is beside himself with terror, a man utterly broken by the unfolding apocalypse. He embraces you, sobbing, babbling about the end of the world. And here, you perform perhaps your most remarkable act of the day. You project an aura of absolute, unshakable calm. You clap him on the back. You tell him not to worry. You announce, in a voice loud enough for all the terrified people around you to hear, that you are tired from your journey and would very much like to take a bath and have some dinner. It is a piece of psychological warfare, so audacious, so brilliantly Roman, that it verges on the absurd. While the sky is literally falling, you, the admiral of the fleet, are concerned with your personal hygiene and evening meal. You are led to Pomponianus's luxurious villa, where slaves, shaking with fear, draw you a hot bath. You bathe. You get oiled. You then proceed to the dining room, where you recline on a couch and eat a meal with a cheerful, even jovial demeanor. You assure everyone that the fires they see on the slopes of the mountain are just abandoned farmhouses burning, that this is all a temporary affair, and that the wind will change soon. It is, of course, a complete lie. You know the situation is catastrophic. You can feel the ground beneath you trembling with increasing frequency. You can hear a new sound, a deep, continuous, terrifying roar from the heart of the mountain. But your performance is for them. You are the commander. Your courage is their courage. If you show fear, all is lost. So you lie, you eat, you project a serenity you absolutely do not feel. You are buying them time, and you are buying them hope with the only tools you have left: your own willpower and a masterful display of Roman ****. After dinner, exhausted from the physical and emotional toll of the day, you retire to a bedroom. And while your host and his household are huddled together, sleepless with terror, you do the most unbelievable thing of all. You go to sleep. Or at least you appear to. Your heavy, regular breathing, a product of your large frame, and perhaps a sinus condition, can be heard through the door. The sound of your snores, loud and steady, becomes a bizarre anchor of normalcy in a world gone mad. For the people cowering in the villa, it is proof that the admiral is not afraid. And if he is not afraid, perhaps there is still reason to hope. But you both know the night is far from over. The real danger has not even begun. You are simply gathering your strength for the final act. Your sleep is not the deep, restorative rest of a man at peace. It is the fitful, shallow slumber of a soldier on the front lines, a calculated pause in the midst of battle. You are aware of every tremor that shakes the villa, every new roar from the mountain that seems to vibrate in your very bones. The air in the room is growing thick and suffocating, stinging your lungs with each breath. Sometime after midnight, you are awakened not by a sound, but by a physical reality. The courtyard outside your room is filling with pumice and ash at an alarming rate. The level of debris is already so high that if you wait any longer, you will be sealed inside, entombed in this luxurious prison. The time for feigned calm is over. The time for action has returned. You gather the others. Pomponianus and his household are nearly catatonic with fear. You have to rally them, shake them from their stupor. The decision is made. Staying in the villa with its shaking walls and the constant threat of a collapsing roof is a death sentence. The only chance, however slim, is to make a run for the shore. Perhaps the wind has changed. Perhaps the sea has calmed. They prepare for the desperate flight. In a moment that is both tragic and strangely human, they tie pillows to their heads with cloth strips. It is their only protection against the ceaseless rain of stones falling from the black sky. Imagine that scene for a moment. A group of wealthy Romans, led by the most powerful admiral in the empire, scurrying through the darkness with cushions strapped to their heads, a last pathetic defense against the wrath of a volcano. It is the ultimate breakdown of the Roman order, the reduction of civilization to a primal scramble for survival. You lead them out of the villa and down towards the beach. The world outside is a Hieronymus Bosch painting brought to life. It is darker than any night you have ever known, a profound starless blackness broken only by the terrifying orange and red glow of the pyroclastic surge's massive, superheated avalanches of gas and ash that are now roaring down the volcano's slopes. The ground heaves and sways like the deck of a ship in a storm. The air is a toxic brew of sulfurous gases that claws at your throat. You carry a torch to light the way, but its meager flame barely penetrates the oppressive, ash-filled darkness. It illuminates a surreal landscape. The familiar trees and gardens of Stabiae are gone, buried under a thick gray blanket. The world has been erased and redrawn in ash. When you finally reach the shore, your last hope dies. The sea is even more violent than before, a chaotic maelstrom of black, churning waves. Escape by water is impossible. The ships that brought you here, your symbols of Roman power and control, are straining at their anchors, useless against the fury of nature. You are utterly, completely trapped. There, on the beach, with the world ending around you, your final moments arrive. While others weep or pray to gods who seem to have abandoned them, you remain composed. You ask for a linen sheet to be spread on the ground. You lie down upon it as if preparing for a rest. Twice you ask for cold water, which you drink calmly. You are trying to conserve your strength, perhaps still believing a rescue is possible. Or perhaps you are simply facing the inevitable with the dignity that has defined your life. Then, a new wave of horror begins. A powerful smell of sulfur, a precursor to a deadly pyroclastic surge, washes over the beach. Flames are seen in the distance, drawing closer. This is the end. The hot, toxic gas is beginning to displace the breathable air. You try to stand, leaning on two of your slaves for support. You take a few steps, and then you simply collapse. Your companions would later say that your breathing, always labored, had become difficult. The toxic fumes, thick with fine ash, were too much for your 56-year-old lungs. There was no dramatic injury, no final heroic speech. You just lay down on the ash-covered sand, surrounded by the chaos, and quietly suffocated. The great mind that had sought to encompass all of the world's knowledge was extinguished by the very forces of nature it had so desperately sought to understand. Your final act was not one of scholarship, but of sacrifice. You died trying to save others. 3 days later, when the eruption finally subsided and a weak, watery light returned to the sky, your body was found. It was lying on the beach where you fell, untouched, with no visible signs of injury. Your nephew wrote that you looked more like a man asleep than one who was dead. Your clothes were undisturbed. You were found exactly as you had lived, a figure of immense composure, even in the face of annihilation. Your doomed mission was a failure, in the sense that you did not save the people of Pompeii or Herculaneum, but it was a profound success in what it revealed about the character of the man and the highest ideals of Roman duty. You chose not to be a spectator. You chose to act, to help, to lead. In the end, It was not scientific curiosity that killed you, but a courageous and deeply compassionate heart. The legacy of that day is twofold. First, there is the archaeological record. The bodies of hundreds of people found huddled in the boat sheds on the beach at Herculaneum tell a powerful story. For a long time, it was thought they had simply run to the shore in a last, desperate act. But knowing your story changes that interpretation. Were they waiting for you? Did they see your ships across the bay and believe that rescue was coming? We will never know for sure, but the possibility reframes their final moments not just as an act of desperation, but as one of hope, a hope that you had personally sailed into a hurricane of fire and rock to deliver. They died waiting for a rescue that almost made it. The second and more certain legacy is the written word. Your nephew Pliny the Younger survived the catastrophe at Misino. He witnessed the panic, saw the sky turn to night, and fled with his mother. His detailed, harrowing account of the event and his loving, respectful tribute to your bravery are the reasons we know this story at all. He ensured that you would not be remembered as a fool, but as a hero. He wrote to the historian Tacitus, "I have described in detail the death of my uncle, so that you may hand it down to posterity with greater truth." He succeeded. His letters transformed your death from a private tragedy into a public testament of Roman virtue. Tonight, you were that man. You were the admiral who commanded ships, the scholar who commanded knowledge, and the human being who commanded an unshakable sense of duty. You felt the sun on your face on a normal afternoon. You felt the thrill of scientific discovery. You felt the weight of command, and you felt the stinging ash in your lungs. You lived a life dedicated to understanding the world, and you gave that life in an attempt to save a small part of it. Your final chapter was not written in an encyclopedia, but on an ash-covered beach, a testament to the fact that the greatest human legacy is not always what we know, but what we are willing to do for others when the sky begins to fall. As our journey through Pliny the Elder's doomed rescue mission concludes tonight, we're reminded that the past is far from dusty and dull. It's a vibrant, often surprising, and always intriguing tapestry, woven with human ingenuity, resilience, and the occasional ancient mystery that still makes us wonder. This is the Sleeping Archaeologist, encouraging you to remain curious about the incredible tales still waiting to be discovered beneath our feet. Our next story is the pharaoh who got cancelled, Egypt's erased king and the city in the sand. Hope you like it. We tend to think of Egyptian pharaohs as unshakable, carved into stone 100 feet high, sitting on golden thrones, their faces stamped on everything from temples to coffee mugs 2 millennia later. They were the original influencers, the ultimate brand managers, curating an image of divine authority so powerful, so absolute, that it feels almost silly to question it. They were gods on earth, and their word was law. Their legacy is permanent as the pyramids. We imagine them striding through their courts with the serene confidence of someone who knows, without a shadow of a doubt, that they will be worshipped for the next 5,000 years. It's a nice, tidy image. A bit boring, if we're being honest, but tidy. That image is a carefully constructed lie. Tonight, you are the man who proves just how fragile that power really is. You are a king, a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, the most powerful family on earth. The year is roughly 1353, and you are living in a world shimmering with gold and divine certainty. You are supposed to be the caretaker of 1,000 gods, the chief priest of a pantheon so ancient it makes the mountains look young. But you have a secret, an idea so radical, so dangerous. It will not only shatter your kingdom, but will get you personally, systemically, and vindictively cancelled by history itself. You are a pharaoh destined to be so despised that your own people will try to pretend you never existed at all. And your name, for now, is Amenhotep IV. The proof of your life and your subsequent erasure isn't found in a grand, intact tomb filled with treasures. Instead, the receipts of your existence are in the evidence of destruction. Archaeologists, digging in the sands of a desolate stretch of desert, found the ruins of a ghost city, a place built and abandoned in a single generation. They found thousands of small, standardized sandstone blocks called talatat from your temples, which had been torn down and used as cheap filler for other, later buildings. The ancient equivalent of finding your masterpiece portrait cut up and used to stuff a mattress. Most damningly, they found statues with your face methodically smashed and stone inscriptions where your royal name, your cartouche, had been meticulously chiseled out, leaving a blank, silent scar in the rock. Someone, with a great deal of effort and fury, tried to delete you from the hard drive of history. This discovery, made in the late 19th and early 20th centuries at a site now known as Amarna, reveals something extraordinary about the precarious nature of absolute power and the revolutionary potential of a single idea. As we settle in tonight, we're going to uncover not just what archaeologists found, but what it tells us about the surprisingly relatable lives of people who lived in the shimmering heat of ancient Egypt. Now dim the lights and prepare to discover why this story will change how you think about gods, kings, and the art of holding a grudge for 3,000 years. The world you were born into is loud, not with machines, of course, but with the cacophony of divinity. Every aspect of life, from the rising of the sun to the flooding of the Nile to the brewing of beer, is governed by a specific deity with their own needs, their own priests, their own festivals, and their own budget. Egypt runs on a sprawling, holy bureaucracy of hundreds upon hundreds of gods. And at the very top of this celestial pyramid scheme sits Amun-Re, the king of gods, whose cult is based in the magnificent city of Thebes. You are a prince, son of the great Amenhotep III, a pharaoh so successful, so wealthy, and so skilled at diplomacy that he has ushered in an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. Your father is known as the dazzling sun disk, a living embodiment of solar power and glory. Thebes, his capital, is the center of the known world, and its heart is the Karnak temple complex, the seat of Amun's power. You grow up in the shadow of this place. You can smell it from the palace, the heavy, sweet scent of burning incense, roasting sacrificial meat, and the cool, damp smell of stone that never quite sees the sun. You hear it too, the endless chanting of priests, the rattling of sistrums, the lowing of cattle being led to slaughter. The priests of Amun are more than just holy men. They are a corporation. They own a staggering amount of land, control vast storehouses of grain, and command armies of workers. Their wealth rivals your own father's. As a young man, you walk through the great hypostyle hall at Karnak, a forest of stone columns so massive they blot out the sky, and you don't feel awe. You feel claustrophobic. You see the endless, complex rituals, the secret knowledge whispered from one high priest to the next, and you don't see reverence. You see a system. A machine built of gold and fear, designed to keep power in the hands of a select few. You are not like your older brother, Thutmose, the heir apparent. He is the perfect prince, skilled in the military arts, comfortable with the elaborate court ceremonial. You are different, quieter, more observant, perhaps more intense. You look at the statues of the gods, the jackal-headed Anubis, the crocodile-headed Sobek, the cow-horned Hathor, and you feel a disconnect. They are beautiful, they are ancient, but they feel like masks, intermediaries, middle management standing between humanity and the true source of all life. You spend your days under the Egyptian sun, a physical presence so total and overwhelming it feels less like a star and more like a consciousness. It is the source of all warmth, all light, all growth. It asks for nothing. It requires no complex rituals, no bloody sacrifices. It simply is. It is the Aten, the disk of the sun. Not the man-like god, Ra, who sails a boat across the sky, but the physical, tangible, universal source of light itself. Then tragedy strikes. Your brother Thutmose dies unexpectedly. The weight of the crown, which was never meant for you, now settles on your shoulders. You are to be the next pharaoh. The machine is waiting to absorb you. The priests of Amun are already preparing the rites, polishing the golden paraphernalia of a coronation that will bind you to them, make you their chief patron, the guarantor of their immense power. But in your mind, a revolutionary seed has already been planted. You see the Aten not as one god among many, but as the only God, the universal creator, not just of Egypt, but of Syria, of Nubia, of all peoples. The old gods, with their petty squabbles and their insatiable hunger for offerings, suddenly seem like childish stories, local superstitions. When your magnificent father finally joins his ancestors, you ascend the throne. You are now Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, and for the first few years, you play the game. You allow yourself to be depicted in the traditional style, worshipping the old gods. You authorize building projects at Karnak. On the surface, you are a dutiful son, upholding the traditions of your fathers. But you are biding your time. You are planning. And you are not alone. You have a partner in this, your great royal wife, a woman of intoxicating beauty and fierce intelligence whose name will echo through history alongside your own, Nefertiti. She understands you. She sees what you see. Together, you believe you have been chosen to deliver a new truth to the world. The whispers begin slowly. You commission new temples, not to Amun, but to the Aten, and they are built in a strange new style. Unlike the dark, mysterious sanctuaries of the old gods, your temples are open to the sky, flooded with the sunlight of your one, true God. The art is even more shocking. For millennia, Egyptian art has been rigid, formulaic. Pharaohs are always depicted as youthful, muscular, perfect. Gods are serene and idealized. It's about projecting an eternal, unchanging order. But the art you commission is weird. You are shown not as a perfect warrior king, but as a strange, elongated figure with a long face, drooping belly, and wide hips. It is shockingly intimate, almost disturbingly naturalistic. You are depicted in tender moments with Nefertiti and your young daughters, kissing them, holding them on your lap. It is a portrait, not of a divine office, but of a human family. To the traditionalists at court, it is blasphemous. It is ugly. It is wrong. But to you, it is truth. The Aten is the god of truth, of what is real, and you are its prophet. The tension in Thebes becomes a physical thing, a weight in the air. The priests of Amun watch your every move. Their smiles are thin, their pleasantries laced with poison. They control the hearts and minds of the people, who for centuries have relied on the comfort of their local gods and goddesses, the familiar rituals that govern their lives. You are not just threatening a religious structure. You are threatening their entire reality. Every amulet they wear, every prayer they mutter, every festival that breaks the monotony of their labor is tied to the old ways. You realize you cannot win a war of attrition on their home turf. You cannot reform a system that is fundamentally opposed to your vision. You have to break it. You have to leave. And so, in the 5th year of your reign, you make a decision that is so audacious, so utterly unthinkable, it sends a shockwave through the entire kingdom. You will abandon Thebes, the ancestral capital of your empire for generations. You will turn your back on its magnificent temples, its sprawling necropolis, its entire history. You will take your court, your administration, your loyal followers, and you will go out into the desert. There, on a virgin site, a place untouched by the worship of any other god, you will build a new city from scratch. A holy city dedicated only to the Aten. You will call it Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten. At the same time, you make the final, irrevocable break. You change your own name. You are no longer Amenhotep. Amun is satisfied. That name is a lie. From this day forward, you are Akhenaten, he who is effective for the Aten. You have just declared war on 1,000 gods. What could possibly go wrong? Finding the right place for your new city is a holy quest. You sail down the Nile, your royal barge a floating palace of cedar wood and gold, scanning the cliffs that line the river. You are looking for a sign, a place where the geography itself seems to pay homage to your god. And then you see it. A wide, semicircular bay of desert, protected by a dramatic sweep of limestone cliffs. At a specific point in the cliffs, there is a break, a wadi that aligns perfectly with the rising sun. In the morning, the light of the Aten will pour through that gap and flood the plain. This is the spot. You step off your barge, the hot sand crunching under your sandals, and you feel a profound sense of destiny. You are standing on holy ground, a blank canvas upon which you will paint your new world. You commission a series of massive boundary stelae, enormous rock carvings in the cliffs surrounding the site. These are your city's founding documents, carved in stone for all to see. In them, you declare your intentions, your oath to the Aten. You swear you will never leave this place. You will build your city here, you will live here, and you will be buried in the eastern cliffs where the sun is born each day. You are cutting all ties to the past. The necropolis of your ancestors, the valley of the kings across the river from Thebes, means nothing to you now. Your eternity belongs to the Aten, and it will be spent here in Achaeton. The sheer logistics of what you are about to do are staggering. It's like deciding to build a new Washington, D.C. in the middle of the Mojave Desert, and to do it in a decade using only bronze tools and manpower. Tens of thousands of people are uprooted from Thebes and other cities and brought to this desolate place. Architects, stonemasons, artists, scribes, soldiers, farmers, and an ocean of unskilled laborers. The desert air, once silent save for the wind, now rings with the sound of hammers on chisels, the shouts of overseers, and the groans of men hauling massive blocks of stone under the searing sun. The site is a chaotic, sprawling construction zone. Dust is everywhere, a fine white powder that coats your tongue, hits in your eyes, and turns the sweat on your skin to a gritty paste. Mud brick houses for the workers spring up like mushrooms after a rain, forming a chaotic, unplanned city while the grand, central buildings are meticulously laid out. You are at the center of it all, not just as a king, but as the chief architect and creative director of this grand project. You obsess over every detail. The great temple of the Aten is your masterpiece. It will have no roof, allowing the sun's rays to pour in, unmediated. It is a series of vast, open-air courts filled with thousands of offering tables, a testament to the boundless generosity of your God. There are no dark, hidden sanctuaries here, no secret rooms where only priests can go. Everything is open, everything is illuminated. Your palace, too, is a marvel of new design. The Great Palace is the official state building, but your family's residence, the King's House, is connected to it by a bridge that spans over the main road of the city. On this window of appearances, you and your family will show yourselves to the people, showering them with gifts, a living link between the divine and the mortal. Life in Achaeton is a strange paradox. For you and the elite, it is a glorious utopia. You are free from the stifling traditions of Thebes. You are surrounded by people who share your vision, or at least are smart enough to pretend they do. Your days are filled with religious ceremony and creative pursuits. You personally oversee the workshops where artists are being trained in your new revolutionary style. You want them to capture truth, the curve of a spine, the slackness of a jaw, the playful energy of a child. For a brief, shining moment, it feels like you have succeeded. You have created a new world, a city of light, a testament to the one true God. You ride through the streets in your chariot, Nefertiti beside you, your daughters trailing behind, and you see your vision made real. The city is clean, orderly, and centered entirely around you, your family, and your God. But for the thousands of workers who built this city and now live in the crowded suburbs on its outskirts, life is less utopian. Archaeological evidence from the workers' village shows a population plagued by hardship. Skeletons reveal high rates of spinal injury from backbreaking labor, malnutrition, and a shockingly low life expectancy. They are building a city of light on a foundation of their own broken bodies. And while you preach of a universal God, their old comforts are gone. They are buried with few of the traditional amulets and funerary objects that were supposed to protect them in the afterlife. Their small personal god's Bess, the protector of the household. Tauret, the goddess of childbirth, have been officially banished. You have given them a grand, abstract, universal deity, but you have taken away the small, intimate gods who they felt truly understood their daily struggles. A quiet resentment begins to fester in the mud-brick alleys, far from the grand avenues of your central city. Your revolution intensifies. You are no longer content with simply ignoring the old gods. You now seek to destroy them. You dispatch agents throughout Egypt with a chilling decree. The name of Amun is to be physically removed from every temple, every statue, every obelisk in the land. Even more shocking, the plural word for gods is to be chiseled out wherever it appears. This is an act of iconoclasm on a scale Egypt has never seen. It is one thing to elevate one god above others. It is another thing entirely to deny their very existence. The names of the gods are not just labels. They are believed to contain their very essence. To destroy a name is to destroy the being itself. You are committing deicide on a national scale. The backlash, though suppressed, is immense. Imagine the terror of a common person watching a royal official take a chisel to the name of a god their family has worshipped for 1,000 years. It is an act of profound violence, an attack on the very fabric of the cosmos. Meanwhile, the world outside your desert paradise continues to turn. Your empire, so carefully maintained by your father through diplomacy and the strategic application of gold, is beginning to show signs of straying. This is when we turn to one of the most remarkable archaeological finds in history, the Amarna letters. A trove of clay tablets found in the ruins of your city, containing the diplomatic correspondence between your court and the other great powers of the Near East. They are written in Akkadian, the international language of the day, and they paint a damning picture. Vassal kings from Syria and Palestine write to you, their overlord, with increasing desperation. They plead for soldiers to help them fight off invaders. They beg for gold. My lord, one writes, my city is on the brink of collapse. Another complains that his last shipment of gold was so impure, it was basically just gilded wood. Your responses, when they come, are often dismissive. You seem utterly absorbed in your religious project. While your empire is fraying at the edges, you are composing hymns to the Aten. You see your God as a universal power, but your foreign policy is becoming increasingly isolationist. You are the sole prophet of the Aten, and only through you can humanity commune with the Creator. This makes you the most important man who has ever lived. The squabbles of minor princelings in some dusty corner of the Levant must seem trivial by comparison. You are busy remaking reality itself. The priests of Amun, now operating in the shadows, see this neglect. They whisper to generals and courtiers, pointing to the chaos on the borders as proof that the old gods have abandoned Egypt in anger. They are not praying for your health. What happens when the old guard decides to fight back? The golden age of Akhenaten begins to tarnish. Your utopia, built so quickly, feels fragile. Cracks begin to appear, not just in the mud-brick walls of the workers' houses, but in the very foundation of your family. The intimate family portraits you commissioned, once a symbol of your new, truthful world, now seem to tell a story of grief. One of your beloved daughters, Akhenaten, dies young. The reliefs in your family's royal tomb show a scene of unbearable sorrow. You and Nefertiti are depicted weeping over her body, your bodies bent in anguish. It is a raw human moment, unlike anything seen before in royal art. But it also raises a terrifying theological question. If the Aten is a benevolent, all-powerful creator, why would it allow this to happen? Why would it inflict such pain on its chosen prophet? Your faith, it seems, does not waver. It hardens. You become more dogmatic, more insistent on your unique role as the sole intermediary between the Aten and humanity. Where you once saw a universal God accessible to all, you now preach that the Aten can only be truly known through you. The religion becomes less about the sun and more about the Sun King. This is a subtle but crucial shift. It alienates even some of your early followers. It transforms a philosophical revolution into a cult of personality. Then history becomes murky. In the later years of your reign, Nefertiti seems to fade from the official record. Her name disappears from inscriptions, sometimes replaced by that of your eldest daughter, Meritaten. Did she die? Did she fall out of favor? Or did she, as some Egyptologists theorize, take on a new, more powerful role, perhaps even ruling alongside you as a co-regent under a different name? The evidence is scant, contradictory. It is a mystery that adds to the sense of an ending, of a court in turmoil. A strange, shadowy figure named Smenkher appears, ruling briefly alongside you, or perhaps immediately after you. We don't know for sure who this person was. Another one of your daughters? A younger brother? The identity is lost to the sands of time. The sun-drenched clarity of your early reign is dissolving into a twilight of uncertainty and intrigue. The world you have built is an isolated bubble, and bubbles are destined to pop. Perhaps you see it coming. Perhaps you are so lost in your divine communion that you are blind to the threats gathering around you. The army is restless, led by generals like Horemheb, who are raised in the traditions of the warrior pharaohs, and have little patience for a pacifist mystic. The bureaucracy is in chaos, its functions disrupted by the move to a new capital and the purge of old officials. The common people are suffering, facing not just a spiritual crisis, but perhaps a literal plague that swept through the city, and economic hardship as trade routes were neglected. Your beautiful city, the horizon of the Aten, is becoming a gilded cage. And then, in the 17th year of your reign, you die. The historical record falls completely silent on how. There is no grand inscription detailing your final days, no account of a noble passing. Were you ill? Was it the plague that had reportedly struck your city? Or was it something more sinister? Did the forces arrayed against you finally make their move? Was there a palace coup? A quiet dose of poison in your wine? We will never know. You, a man who wanted everything to be illuminated by the truth of the sun, depart the world in a shroud of shadow and mystery. You are buried, as you wished, in the royal tomb you prepared in the eastern cliffs of your holy city. For a brief moment, it seems your legacy might endure. Your young son, a boy named Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten, ascends to the throne. But the boy is a pawn in a much larger game. The court is still filled with powerful figures from the old guard, men who have been waiting patiently for you to die. The chief among them are a wise old vizier named Ai and the ambitious general Horemheb. They see their chance to restore order, which to them means restoring the old ways. They exert their influence on the young king. Within a few years, the decision is made. The court will abandon Akhenaten. The great experiment is over. The boy king changes his name, a public act of repudiation against everything you stood for. He is no longer Tutankhaten. He is now Tutankhamen, the living image of Amen. The restoration has begun. The return to Thebes is a public triumph for the priests of Amun. The city erupts in celebration. The old festivals are reinstated with renewed fervor. The coffers of the temples of Amun, which had run dry during your reign, are once again filled with gold. The people breathe a collective sigh of relief. The familiar gods are back in their heavens. All is right with the world. Your beautiful city, Akhenaten, is left to the desert. Its palaces are stripped of their finery. Its temples stand empty, and the wind begins to blow sand through its once bustling streets. It becomes a ghost town, haunted by the memory of a god that failed. But forgetting you is not enough. The wound you inflicted on Egypt's psyche was too deep. The act of destroying the gods was an unforgivable blasphemy. The shame of the Amarna period, as it would come to be known, had to be expunged. The real erasure begins under the pharaohs who followed Tutankhamun, particularly Horemheb, your old general, who eventually seizes the throne for himself. He is a man of the old school, and he is determined to set things right. He initiates a formal campaign of damnatio memoria, the damnation of memory. This is not just neglect. This is an active, state-sponsored campaign to delete you, your family, and your god from history. Teams of workmen are dispatched to every corner of Egypt. Their task is simple and brutal. Find every monument you ever built, every inscription that bears your name, and destroy it. At Karnak, the beautiful temples you built to the Aten are painstakingly dismantled. The small talatat blocks they were made from are repurposed as infill from massive new pylons being built to honor Amun-Ra. Your art is literally buried inside the monuments of your enemies. Statues of you and your family are toppled, smashed, and thrown into pits. Inscriptions are attacked with a furious precision. The oval cartouche that frames your royal name is a sacred symbol, a protector of the name's power. Workmen are ordered to chisel it out, to gouge your name from the stone, leaving a blank, brutal scar. On official king lists, your name and the names of your immediate successors are simply omitted. History is rewritten to show your father, Amenhotep III, being directly succeeded by Horemheb, as if you in the 18 years of your reign were nothing but a bad dream. You are no longer referred to by name, but only as the enemy or that criminal of Akhetaten. The campaign is terrifyingly thorough. For nearly 3,000 years, it is almost completely successful. Your memory fades from a damned abomination into complete obscurity. Later Egyptians, walking past a defaced inscription, would have no idea who the enemy was. You were simply gone. A ghost, a void in the otherwise seamless tapestry of pharaonic history. The city of Akhetaten was so completely abandoned that its exact location was lost. It was just another stretch of empty desert along the Nile. It seemed as though your enemies had won. You bet everything on a single revolutionary idea, and you lost. Your punishment was to be forgotten. But they forgot one thing: the desert preserves. The very sand that buried your city also protected it. And the builders who used your dismantled temples as filler material inadvertently created a time capsule. In the late 19th century, a local woman digging for fertilizer in the sand at the site of Amarna stumbled upon the clay tablets of your diplomatic archive, the Amarna letters. This was the first clue. Scholars were baffled. Here was a collection of correspondence addressed to pharaohs whose names they recognized, like Amenhotep III, but also to this other king, this Akhenaten, who appeared nowhere else in the king lists. Who was he? Archaeologists flocked to the site. Flinders Petrie, the father of modern Egyptology, began systematic excavations. And slowly, piece by piece, your world re-emerged from the sand. They uncovered the grid-like streets of your city. They found the ruins of your open-air temples and your window of appearances. They unearthed the sculptors' workshops, including the studio of the master sculptor Thutmose. And in the ruins of that studio, in 1912, a German team led by Ludwig Burchard made one of the most famous archaeological discoveries of all time. Lying face down in the rubble was a life-sized, painted limestone bust of a woman of almost otherworldly beauty, her long neck, serene expression, and iconic blue crown perfectly preserved. It was the face of your queen, Nefertiti. This bust, more than any other artifact, brought your story back to life. It gave your lost world a face. And as archaeologists continued to dig, they found the evidence of the destruction. They found the smashed statues. They found the chiseled-out cartouche. They excavated the workers' village and learned of the hardships they endured. They pieced together the Talatat blocks from within Horemheb's pylons at Karnak, like a giant three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, reconstructing the scenes from your lost temples. The very actions your enemies took to erase you became the primary evidence of your existence. Their rage, carved in stone, became their confession. The story they tried to bury was so dramatic, so compelling, that you were transformed from a forgotten heretic into one of the most fascinating and controversial figures in all of ancient history. You tried to give your people a single, universal God of light and truth. They rejected it. You built a magnificent city in the desert, a monument to your vision. It lasted for less than 20 years before being abandoned to the scorpions and the wind. You tried to remake your world, to break with millennia of tradition, and in the end, that tradition broke you. It rose up and consumed you, and then did its very best to pretend you had never been born. But in the end, you got the last laugh. Your name, Akhenaten, is now known across the world, while the names of the priests who plotted against you are footnotes in dusty academic journals. Your wife, Nefertiti, is an icon of beauty and power, her face more famous than almost any other pharaoh. And your son, the boy King Tutankhamun, who is forced to repudiate you, owes his entire global fame to the simple fact that his tomb, rushed and relatively minor, was one of the few to escape the notice of looters, precisely because your enemies were so busy erasing you from the more prominent burial sites that they forgot about the boy. Your heresy, your failure, inadvertently protected him, turning him into the most famous king in Egyptian history. Your story is a profound lesson in the nature of power, faith, and memory. It reminds us that history is not just a collection of facts, but a narrative written by the victors. And sometimes, the narrative they write is an act of deliberate, furious silence. You are a poet, a mystic, a tyrant, a visionary, a husband, a father, and a heretic. You dared to look at the sun and see not a god, but God itself. You flew too close to it, perhaps, but the shadow you cast, once so violently erased, has proven to be longer and more enduring than anyone in your time could have ever imagined. The sand could not hold your secrets forever. As our journey through Akhenaten's revolution and the city of Amarna concludes tonight, we're reminded that the past is far from dusty and dull. It's a vibrant, often surprising, and always intriguing tapestry, woven with human ingenuity, resilience, and the occasional ancient mystery that still makes us wonder. This is the Sleeping Archaeologist, encouraging you to remain curious about the incredible tales still waiting to be discovered beneath our feet. Good night.